All right, hello. This is my fifth lecture in a series on exchange theory, and we're talking about U.S. actions in the Middle East. And before I begin this, I want to start with a quick, caveat. I want to say that I know a lot of people want to attack this, and in fact, they're desperate to make a big attack, a pathetically desperate Custer's Last Stand attack to artificially build up a big uh, lying attack wave in social reality, which dominates mass perception without the masses knowing a single fact or intelligent analysis. Uh, yeah, the liars just hope to scream a simple bullshit, bullshit, blah, 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 so loud and so often that it would be the only thing that dominates the mass mind. All right. However, I do admit that there is one vulnerable point which I know they're going to attack. The liars will then shift all focus onto it and off of everything else. For example, my analysis of the USS Stark attack. But as we continue this study and more and more information develops on U.S. actions in the Middle East, uh, it'll become readily obvious the many ways wealth is made off of war involving Middle East oil producing nations. All right. Okay. And keep in mind, a big thing is we lost control of oil price in 1970 71, and that control went to OPEC. How do you destroy OPEC? Okay. So my plan is to teach a general chronological account of starting from the Iran coup to the Iraqi attack on the USS Stark. Then I'm going to go back and do a more detailed analysis of the economics of oil at that time. I'll also do a more detailed analysis of the Iran Contra investigation because I expect that with my general examination, people will think that there's a chance to attack. So I'll go through a more detailed analysis using the Senate Iran Contra investigation report. Uh, okay, so a quick review. We had examined exchange theory, power in exchange, and the five ways to overcome weakness in exchange. And those five ways are find alternative supply of the commodity you need, reduce your need for that commodity, find an alternative commodity that replaces it that's just as good or good enough, find some commodity the other person needs to improve your exchange position. And last thing you could do is create demand for a commodity that you already possess within the other person. Okay. Now, all these methods have been used for the oil market and oil price, and oil price has a huge impact upon the economy. Right. Just want you to recall what Icky said about the growth of industrial society being based upon oil. Right. It's written in the back of oil. And then you have director of the CIA, Woolsey, saying, quote, oil's monopoly over transportation and the cartel, that's OPEC, control of a huge share of oil production together increasingly threaten our economic viability, our national security, and the stability of many nations in the world as well. Then he says, destroying them should be the first priority of those in government who want their societies to have the advantages of a market economy. Okay. Right. Daniel Jurgen said the same thing as Ickes. We'll go through a quote that he said today, which pretty much says exactly what Ickes said. Remember, Ickes was FDR's Secretary of Interior. All right. So why is oil so important to the economy? Just a quick review. Well, industrial economies are based upon machine production, which has concentrated, capital located in a central location, and because of that, you're making high volumes, and you can't consume all of it there. It requires distribution, transportation to other places, other markets. All right, and this requires oil. Transportation is based on oil today. All right. Hopefully, we'll get off of that pretty soon. At least, some aspects of transportation. Synthetic chemical industry, yeah. So oil is not just important for transportation. Basically, oil makes every other product. If it's not made of basic things like animal products, plant products, glass or metals or ceramics or cements, right? It's made from oil. So the vast majority of products that we, enjoy and use are made from oil. All right. And this diagram shows the very strong correlation between oil price and inflation, and then inflation inversely with the economy. Right. So when you have high inflation, it whacks the economy. Right. When you have low inflation, the economy benefits. Right. Okay. It's not so simple as that, but that's a simple, correlation there. All right, so I want to start with a review of the oil industry up to the Iran coup. So this is what we did in our last lecture. We talked about how the oil industry developed in the middle of the 19th century. All right, they learned ways of separating out the different components of oil. First, fractional distillation of petroleum. All right, separating out different parts of oil based upon molecular size and boiling point. And then, it goes through the progression of discovery of different uses for oil. First, it was used for lighting, and then it's used for transportation, different vehicles being invented. Then it's used for synthesizing plastics, all right, the first plastics, all right. And we talked about how the demand for oil really increased with World War One and after World War One. After World War One was when gasoline consumption in the U.S. anyways really started taking off, and then it was also so in Europe. And also after World War One, there was the first nationalization of foreign oil. So Western companies developed overseas oil, and including the Soviet oil at Baku, and they were the first to nationalize in 1920. Uh, then Mexico nationalized in what's that, 38, right? World War II comes along, another high demand for oil, and there's again fears that the U.S. oil reserves are going to be depleted. So FDR makes a deal with the Saudi royal families, stating, "Hey, we'll keep you in power if you guarantee us a reliable, reasonable source of oil." Oh man, something in the air. Oh, goodness sakes. Oh. All right, then in 1951, a Middle East oil producing nation, Iran, they had a democratic government. Prime Minister was a guy named Mossadegh, this guy here. And he shepherds through a bill through the parliament to nationalize uh, Anglo-Iranian, which is a British company, BP today, oil, right? So they take over and say, hey, this is our oil now, right? Thank you very much, for developing it. But you know what? You've been screwing us, so we're taking it. All right. So then, 2 years later, the CIA and British MI6 conduct a coup, and they overthrow the government. They overthrow a democratic government, install a dictator, the Shah here, and I want to just review quickly the reasons why we did this. All right, so I'm going to start with a review of the Iran coup, and the real reason why we overthrew the government was not just Iran itself, but if you let them nationalize their resource, all right, it doesn't have to be oil, any resource that Western nations have, developed and dominated and controlled. All right, uh, then that's going to happen throughout the world. Right? They're going to say, "Hey, look what Iran is doing." Right? Why don't we do that? Then you got a big problem. You got a big wildfire that's raging out of control, and you can't stop it. Right? So they wanted it hit it early and uh, put out the fire early, right? So this is also an example of many the dirty CIA games, and some of the dirty things that the CIA did was they sabotaged the Iranian economy. I mean, that's the best way to get the leader overthrown, or to reduce his approval and popularity, right? Bad economy. People, that strikes at the heart of people right away. Uh, and then they conducted a massive propaganda campaign against Mossadegh, the prime minister, and they manufactured false documents proving ties between Mossadegh and the communists. I always find it funny that they manufactured fake documents in order to prove, right? Quote, prove. And then they timed the release of these documents before the coup. They also printed counterfeit currency and accused Mossadegh of printing it in order to intentionally destroy the economy. Okay. Accused Mossadegh of fostering separatist movements in Iran in order to weaken Iran to facilitate a Soviet takeover, which would piss off all the nationalistic people. Right before the coup, have CIA agents call up key religious leaders claiming to be communist supporters of Mossadegh, and then they make threats to kill the leaders. Right. Then, right before the coup, these agents, CIA agents, actually carry out the threat attacks, killing religious leaders by blowing them up with bombs. And then they have other religious leaders standing by to point the finger at Mossadegh, right? And that then sparks off the coup, the overthrow of Mossadegh. And then in the aftermath, you make the coup appear as legal or at least quasi-legal. Okay. All right, so that's some of the. I mean, that's typical CIA stuff. How to overthrow a government. Uh, most Americans have no idea this stuff goes on. All right, 3 years after this, in '56, there was a American geologist named M. King Hubert who came up with a pretty accurate prediction called peak oil. He said the United States is going to reach peak oil production, and then it's going to go all downhill from there. We're going to have limited oil reserves. It's going to run out. And he made this prediction in '56 and then modified it in '62, '65, '67. But in all cases, he pointed to 1970 as the date of peak oil, right? And he was absolutely right, except for the development of new technology that allowed to access the tight oil that's trapped in slate rock through fracking. All right, so the red curve here is his prediction of peak oil, and the green curve is actual, oil production, and he's just about right on, except actual production peaked a little bit higher. It headed down, just as he predicted. But then what happened is fracking kicked in. So they invented the technology to do fracking using high pressure water to hydraulically fracture rock to release the oil. All right, and that opened up a big new source of oil, and we're now way above this curve. This is 9.6 million barrels per day. We're above 12 up here somewhere. Um, in fact, the United States is the largest oil producer in the world. Uh, I mean, you wouldn't think so, right? You would think like, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or Russia or something like that, but no, it's the United States. All right. Then another key event occurred in 1960, and that was the formation of OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. That's what it stands for, right? It's a cartel, first formed of 5 nations, now it's 14. And the cartel gets together, and what they do is they set production limits for everyone. They kind of divvy up how much each country gets to produce, right? Say, okay, they try to, it's a negotiating, bargaining thing, I'm sure, right? Try to make it, I guess, fair, but so that everyone buys into it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Uh, and the problem with cartels, it gives too much concentrated power for supply of oil to these nations. And OPEC represents about 40% of the market share of oil. I mean, that's going to vary, but it's roughly about 40%. And uh, interesting fact is OPEC patterned itself after some cartels that were in the United States, oil cartels in the United States. But typically in the United States, if you have a cartel or a trust, the Justice Department's going to swoop in and bust it up, right? Because trusts, although they benefit that small group of companies in the trust by jacking a price, they cause, how I want to say, they threaten the overall economy, right? So trusts jack up price, which jacks up input costs, which decreases the competitiveness of all their companies that are dependent upon that commodity. Now, in something like oil, that's transportation, that's synthesis of synthetic materials, right? A lot of companies are hit by that. Most companies are dependent upon transportation one way or another, right? So um, anyways, so you can see how trusts are not a good thing for our economy if they damage the overall competitiveness, you know, of our companies, especially in the national sphere. Um, so the question is, here, if OPEC was in the United States, the U.S. Justice Department would bust it up, but we don't have worldwide jurisdiction. So how do you go about and destroy OPEC? Just like Woolsey said, you know, how do we destroy OPEC? All right, that's a key question, and we're going to start looking at it today. I know today is not going to be definitive, all right, but you're going to see more and more how, man, conflict is going to be very effective at lowering oil price, especially after the first Gulf War. Uh, uh, Less so during the Iraq invasion war because by that time the Asian economies were taking off. China and India were really taking off, and then demand was soaring, right? And prices are going up, right? Uh, but there was plenty. The second Gulf War, the Iraq invasion war, shows that there are plenty of ways of making money off of war, right? By uh, groups in power. All right. Then 1961, the Prime Minister of Iraq, Qassim, he tries to invade Kuwait, and he's blocked by British forces. And this is kind of like a foreshadowing or precursor of what Saddam Hussein would try to do 30 years later in 1990. Was it like July or August he invaded, right? And then the Gulf War was in early 1991. All right, then in 1962. Oh, by the way, in 60, Cuba nationalized oil, Indonesia nationalized oil, and I'm willing to bet Cuba nationalized oil because he's got backing from the Soviet Union. He's got technical backing. They probably stepped in and said, "Hey, we'll run your oil industry for you." All right. So 62, Burma nationalized its oil, Algeria nationalized its oil, Sri Lanka nationalized its oil. You see that there's a rising wave now. Cuba, Indonesia was only one at first, and this was squashed, right? And it was squashed to prevent others from doing it. But you know what? It happened anyway, right? All these nations nationalized their oil to the point that by 1980, pretty much all foreign oil that had been developed by Western corporations, Western oil companies, had been nationalized. All right. Uh, okay. And now, what facilitated this wave of nationalization was the rise of small independent oil companies. All right. Now, the oil had been developed by the majors, major companies like BP today, Shell, all these companies like they're Chevron today, but they're like Gulf, Standard Oil, so forth. Gulf. I think Gulf was the one that developed Kuwaiti oil, as I recall. Um, all right. So yeah. Now, what happened is you have these small independent companies that have the technology, they have the know-how, and they offer their services. Hey, you signed a decent contract with us. We'll develop and run your oil industry, right? Uh, you know, so that made it possible. And recall that this is a big part of why Iran failed. This is a big part of economic warfare against Iran. Was you sabotage the oil industry equipment, and also you prevent any technicians from coming in, which the U.S. and Britain did. They used diplomatic power to prevent visas to Iran for oil technical experts to come in and run the oil industry, and so Iran's oil industry basically died, and their economy died, right? Which didn't bode well for Mossadegh. All right, so lack of technicians, sabotage of equipment, but the key thing was the British embargo, which included a naval blockade too. All right, then Mossadegh, Prime Minister of Iraq, nationalizes Iraqi oil. After which he's overthrown by a CIA U.S. coup, reported to have been, right. Now I haven't investigated this. I just read some secondary sources on this, right. I haven't looked up any primary documents. So I have no opinion. I'm not going to say one way or the other. But there is substantial evidence that the U.S. backed Saddam Hussein in a failed coup in 1959. So we're working with Saddam Hussein way back then, right? Uh, then Argentina nationalized its oil, Ghana nationalized its oil, followed by Britain, Peru. In '69, Algeria took 51% ownership of French oil operations. I remember northern and northwestern Africa was a French colony, all that area. 1970, we talked about M. King Hubert. His prediction on peak oil production came true. We peaked out at 9.6 million barrels per day, right? Just as predicted. And it was all downhill after that until fracking kicked in, which no one anticipated, way back in, this time, right? Um, the late 1960s. Oh, this is a quote from Daniel Yergin. So he's talking. This is the quote that I said that is similar to Icky's. The late 1960s and early 1970s were, for the most part, years of high economic growth for the industrial world, and in some years, outright boom. This growth was fueled by oil. Daniel Yergin, okay, prized, right? And that's what Icky said. Remember, he said that industrial, uh, societies have risen on the back of oil, right? Well, that's exactly what Jurgen's saying here. All right, 1971, a key event occurred that's related to peak oil. Texas Railroad Commission sets pro rationing at 100% production. Pro rationing is how you divvy up how much each company can produce, right, to set their quota, right? And that's how you control production levels. That's how you control price, all right? But they're saying, you know what? You take off all the stops, produce all you can, right? And what that meant was the reason why they did it is because our oil consumption exceeded our production capacity, right? Right. So we had to just produce all that we can, and we're not even producing enough, right? This means the U.S. has no spare production capacity, which means we no longer have control of price, right? The control of spare production capacity, or what's called the monitor of spare production, went to OPEC because they had plenty of spare production capacity, especially countries like Saudi Arabia. Uh, and so OPEC assumed control of price, right? And control of price is the essence of monopoly power. So OPEC had monopoly power over the key resource that upon which industrial economies depend. All right. Let's see. So yeah, and what happened is net oil imports rose rapidly from 2.2 million barrels per day in '67 to 6 million barrels per day in '73. Imports as a share of total oil consumption over that same time rose from 19% to 36%. That's over a third. Over a third of the oil we use is foreign oil, right? And 6 million barrels per day. That's a lot, right? Imported. So this is another quote by Jurgen. How he's saying, "Man, it's a real, it's not a good situation to be dependent upon the Middle East." He said, "Indeed, the razor's edge was ever increasing reliance upon the oil of the Middle East." Right? And here's the thing: we don't even have to buy a drop of Middle East oil. We can buy all of foreign oil from Mexico or Venezuela or uh, North Sea oil, whatever, right? But Middle East oil is still going to have a big impact upon world oil price, right? Oil is a world market. Okay, I mean you have certain sub markets in there, to varying degrees, based on certain situations, but it's a world market. Oil is shipped around the world in these big tankers pretty efficiently. Okay, all right. So then I want to talk about the inflation of the early 1970s and how Nixon responded to that with what's called today the Nixon shock in 1971, right? that inflation was caused not by oil yet, because the big inflation from oil came in 73. Even though we lost control of price, oil price was okay, okay, okay until 73. That's when the big jump occurred, right? I can show you a diagram of that. Let's see here. All right, yeah, okay. So here's oil price here 1920s, all right? So World War II, right? It's pretty steady, even going down a little bit, right? Then, all right, yeah, peak oil here in 1970. It's creeping up a little bit, 71, right? You know, 73, Yom Kippur War, oil embargo, bam, it's going way up. Okay. Okay. All right. So where are we at? Where are we at here? What was I going to say here? Okay. So Nixon shock. And what he did is he had there's high inflation, so he instituted wage and price freezes. Which, man, I'd have to study that, right, back then. But I just instinctively I'm really adverse to you know uh, I guess artificial or intervention in the market as far as controller of uh, price and distribution of resources, which the market is very efficient, right? You start messing with that, there's always a lot of like unpredictable consequences. All right. And he went off the gold standard. Now, the reason why he went off the gold standard was this, right? We were on the gold standard because of an agreement after World War II called the Bretton Woods Agreement, right? And it was trying to address and prevent, a situation that occurred before the war, and which is a factor leading to the war, and that was the aggressive devaluation of currency by different nations, to lower price in their country for the country's goods to get a trade advantage, right? And it was aggressive, and it just fueled more economic nationalism, and it created instability, in exchange rates, which obstructed international transactions, right? Not only was it, stultifying for economic growth, but it created more conflict. All right. So what Bretton Woods did is says, okay, we can't do this again, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to peg all currencies together in a sense, and how it's going to work is the dollar is going to be pegged to gold, right? Exchangeable for gold at a set rate, and then all of the currencies will be pegged to the dollar, and it's up to the responsibility of each individual nation with their own currency to maintain that peg. Something like maintain it within like 3% range, right? All right, so what happened was because the U.S. had high inflation, because of the Vietnam War, because of the war and poverty, all this welfare spending and so forth, right? Um, there was high inflation, economy's overheating, it's stressing, demand for goods. There's shortages, you're right. With shortages, demand exceeds supply, and that's going to raise price. You got inflation, all right? Now, with inflation, prices are going up in the U.S. and dollar value is going down, right? Now, all these other countries have to maintain their peg to the dollar with a decrease in dollar. So what they got to do is they got to print currency, right? Right? They're evaluating their currency, and they're using that currency to purchase dollars, right? To which they put into their foreign reserves, right? And in so doing, what they're doing is increasing demand for dollars. And so doing, what they're doing is propping up dollar value, right, with their own falling currency value, which is inflationary. So the end effect here was uh, because of the Bretton Woods system and because of U.S. inflation, the U.S. was exporting inflation to other nations. Now, inflation is not a good thing. I showed you how the economies are negatively correlated with high inflation, right? Why? One is high inflation cause rising prices that discourages consumption, but also it causes high interest rates. That could be the bigger effect, right? That discourages new investment. That discourages purchase of major ticket items, right? Big ticket items. All right. Let's see. So yeah, Bretton Woods inflation. All right, so I guess I covered that. All right, more nationalization: Libya, Iraq, Nigeria. I'm not going to read through all these. It's happening. Saudi 72. Saudi Arabia takes one quarter control of Aramco. They got enough cash. They can buy out a quarter of it, and they're going to buy out more and more of it right until they have the whole damn thing, and then they're going to take it off public. It's no longer going to be a public stock. It's a private owned company. Libya takes 50% of, Italian, 100% of Bunker Hill. Iraq nationalizes a bunch of stuff. Iran nationalizes remaining stuff here. I'll just skip through that. Right. So more and more nationalization. That's the idea. And then 73 comes along, and key event occurred here called the Yom Kippur War between Arab nations and Israel. Right. Uh, Pretty much the background of this is there was a 67 war, 6 day war in which Israel just dominated Arabs. To a large extent through surprise attack. Right, it was a preemptive attack, but also because they had superior strategy. Right, and one of the things they focused on was taking out the Arab countries' air forces. All right, once they took out the air forces, once they destroyed airfields, so you couldn't take off and so forth. Right, um, that's suppressed their air power, and they had carte blanche. They could fly in over any battlefield and just whack any enemy forces on the ground. Right, that was a key. That was a key factor in that quick victory, was making sure you take out their air force. Typically what's done is you take out the air force, you take out their radar systems, you take out their command and control, their communications, things like that right away. Right, chop off the head. Um, all right. Um, so yeah, they did that. But now in this war, it was different. One of the things we'll talk about two weapons that made that possible. One is mobile surface-to-air missiles, which even if you take out the air force, even if you suppress the enemy's air, right, you're still getting shot down by these on the ground. Right, these are throwing up an umbrella that's going to cover the ground forces for the Arab armies. Right, and also another factor was very effective anti-tank missiles here. Russian version of essentially what a TOW missile is for the United States. We'll talk about that later, though. All right, so now quickly, everyone in the Nixon administration on the first day expected another, you know, quick defeat. In fact, I read the documents, the communications between different, people in the administration, and they were almost like joking and laughing that, all right, Israel's going to, clean up shop here again, just whip them again like the 6 Day War. But within a day or so, it was like, holy crap, Israel's going to go under, right? Uh, Israel was on the edge of defeat. And I mean, literally, Israel could have gone bye bye as a nation. And so the U.S. stepped in, and we shipped big shiploads of weapons to Israel to keep them in the fight there. And Arabs, you couldn't hide that from the Arabs. They saw it, they got all pissed off. So they retaliated and they embargoed oil to the United States. No oil for you, right? OPEC retaliates, oil embargo. There's a drop in 5 million barrels per day. Okay, I mean, to me that seems a little high, but we were in 71, or 73, importing 6 million barrels per day. So I guess it's possible, right? Where did I get this from? I think I got this from Jurgen. I don't know. I can't remember. Um, all right, so yeah, so oil prices quadruple and it kills our economy. Oil is realized as a weapon. So the OPEC has realized that oil is a weapon against the Western country. You can punish them, right? In fact, yeah, that's this section here: sanctions against oil producing countries or embargoes by oil producing countries against oil dependent countries who are dependent upon importing nations. It's a form of economic warfare. Right? That's my overall chart there. All right. Let's see here. So now prices jumped up high, and they remained high through 1979, and they jumped up again because now you had the Iran Revolution, and we and have sanctions against Iranian companies, and then they throw embargoes on oil against us, so no oil from Iran, and oil triples in price, right? So there's two big jumps in price, and I'll show you. What they look like here. So here is the Yom Kippur War, Arab oil embargo, boom. Here is the Iran Revolution. They're not showing it here. Iran Revolution, boom, kicks in. All right, let's see here. Where we at here? Where we at here? Okay, so Libya, yeah, oil is a weapon and holds the world economy hostage. All right. Libya nationalizes some more oil. All right. And Qatar nationalized oil in 74. And then in June, this is kind of significant. In June of 74, Nixon establishes the petrodollar. All right. Petrodollar is basically an agreement between, first, it started with Saudi Arabia, and then it spread to all OPEC nations. They agree that they only sell oil for dollars, right? So if you're a nation, anywhere in the world, you want to buy some oil, you better have some dollars. And what that does is, right, that increases demand for dollars. And what that does is that helps boost dollar demand, right, which stems inflation, right? And so that's why he did it, but also recycling, right? Because once you get this dollars, all these oil producing nations are fat with dollars, right? Well, what are they going to do with dollars? Well, you buy U.S. goods, right? I mean, to a certain extent, dollar is a universal currency. You can purchase other goods using dollars throughout the world, right? But a big source of that is buying U.S. goods or investing in America, right? Which the Saudis did, a lot of OPEC nations they did, right? They purchased a lot of U.S. goods. They invested, quite a bit in America. They bought a lot of U.S. weapons, right? Um, Especially the Shah in Iran, right? But all those guys, Saudis bought quite a few, right? All right, let's see where we at here. Oh yeah, so the idea was to stem inflation and recycle U.S. dollars back to the U.S. All right. Then 75, Kuwait nationalizes oil. 76, Venezuela nationalizes oil. 77, Alaskan oil production starts to kick in, and North Sea production becomes significant. So here's our peak oil again, right? Reached the peak there, 9.6 million in 1970, right? Starts falling off, but then Alaska oil kind of helps, I guess buffer the fall, right? So we're still going down, but it helps out a little bit, right? Kind of tempers that fall. But the real big boost was fracking right here in green. So this is, standard wells. This is Alaskan oil here, and this is fracking here. All right. So yeah, you got you get you these are not. Oh, what's critical here? These are non-OPEC. Uh, I'm gonna move this a little bit. All right, so non-OPEC. That's what's important there about that. All right. Now, 1979, the Iranians finally had enough of their dictator, the Shah, who he put in power, and he's a brutal, corrupt dude. And so they overthrow him. He's seen as a puppet of the United States. They don't like him, right? U.S. gives. Well, what happened is, when they had the revolution, he hightailed it out of there, right? And he tried to get refuge in certain countries. He's being bounced around. No one wants him, right? So, and he's trying to get treatment for cancer. I'm not sure what type of cancer he had. He had cancer, and the U.S. was the only country that could really help him. So he appealed for, asylum in the U.S. and we gave it to him. And then all these Iranian hotheads, I guess they're called students, but I'm sure it was more than just students, right? These young guys, young hotheads, right? They're like, hey, you give back, right? Right? and we're like, now we're not going to give back. So they get all pissed off, and they storm our embassy, take our embassy. They seized our embassy, seized, I believe it was 63 people, right, of which 13 were released. So, but they kept 50 hostages as leverage to get the Shah. We'll give them you back. We'll give them back, as soon as you get back to Shah, right? Now, most Americans, I didn't know at the time when I was a kid. I didn't know all the history behind what we did, overthrowing the government, so forth, right? Putting in the Shah, right? So we see them taking our embassy and our hostages, and we're just pissed, right? You scumbag! What right do you have to do this, right? And that's shown to the American public every damn day, right? In fact, a TV show called Nightline was formed solely for the Iran hostage crisis thing, right? Day one, day 450, whatever, right? Of the hostage crisis, what's going on, right? So we're barraged by this day by day, right? And people just hated Iranians, right? I remember as a kid, people getting beat up just because they looked like they're Iranian. I mean, they could have been Hindu, Pakistani, you know, they could have they could have been Jordanian, whatever. They could have been, who knows, right? People are getting beat up because they look like they're Iranian. That's how crazy, ignorant some people are. All right, Carter, in response to them taking our embassy, Carter embargoed Iranian oil. Iran turned around and said, "Okay, yeah, well, no oil for you anyways. No oil for U.S. companies, right? Oil prices jumped another 3 times, right? I say 12 times in 6 years. 12. It's not quite that bad, right? But it was bad, right? Kills our economy, causes stagflation, right? And that's what got Jimmy Carter kicked out of office. That's the main thing. He didn't get reelected primarily because of this. Well, he had other failures too, like the whole hostage rescue thing was a big debacle, right? All right. Main thing was the economy was bad. Um, the U.S. supports Saddam Hussein and Iraq as our ally. Why? Well, because it's a bulwark against. Uh, Let me just pull this up on a map. All right. So these are all the Middle Eastern countries. Most of them are oil producing, to some extent, right? Some more than others, right? Including some in the Persian Gulf area, Qatar's an island. All right. Now, Iran is a sole Islamic republic, right? So these are all monarchies, right? And Iran had an Islamic revolution, and they threatened export of the revolution, especially to Middle Eastern countries, outside itself. They want to spread the revolution. Just kind of like ISIS wanted to spread their Islamic caliphate, right? Kind of same thing here, somewhat similar, right? It was more like the French Revolution. I'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, so that's a threat to these guys. All right, it's also a threat to the Soviet Union. Soviet Union has a lot of Islamic territories. All these, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan over here, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. Azerbaijan is almost 100%. It's dominated by Islam, right? And the Caucasus up here, right, which are critical here, including Chechnya. There's a whole bunch of different little, what do you call them? I don't know, territories, right? Chechnya is one of them that's been a long historic thorn in the side for Russia, and then the Soviet Union, breaking away multiple times whenever it got the chance. All right, let's see here. Where are we at here? Let's see. All right. Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say. The reason why we support Iraq is because it's a bulwark. It's like the barrier between Iran and all the rest of the Middle East, right? It's the buffer zone, so to speak, right? Kind of like Germany was viewed as the buffer zone after the Bolshevik Revolution and the establishment of communism in Russia. right? Germany was seen as the buffer zone or bulwark against a spread into Western Europe. Well, Iraq is kind of seen the same way. As a rough analogy. All right, 1980, Saudi Arabia takes 100% control of Aramco. So, like I said, they bought out Aramco. They take it off public. It's a private company now, owned by the Saudi royal family. And essentially, at this point, U.S. and Western nations have lost direct control of essentially all foreign oil production. Right? They lost control. They lost direct control of the key commodity that drives industrial economy. All right. Remember the U.S. lost control of price in '71. Okay, this just adds to it. And now, in terms of the Iran export of revolution, um, I read a CIA analysis from March of 1980. It's declassified, at least most of it. Well, maybe not most of it. A lot, big chunks of it are redacted, right? But what it said basically, what it didn't redact, said that Iran is intent on exporting its revolution to neighboring states, right? Threatening Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, right? So that was seen by the CIA, and that was obvious. In fact, that was stated by the leaders of Iran. We'll get to it down here. They said we got to export our revolution. We're going to overthrow these neighboring states, these Sunni monarchies, and put in power a religious, a religious state, just like ours. I don't know if I want to call it a caliphate. I guess you could say it's a caliphate, which is a religious state. um, Let me look that up real quick. What is the definition of caliphate? Uh, oh, no internet. All right, caliphate. Rule or reign of a caliph or chief Muslim ruler. All right. So a Muslim ruler is going to be a religious ruler here. So I guess you can call it a caliphate. All right. All right. Now, key event occurred in September of 1980, and that is the start of the Iran-Iraq War, where Iraq invaded Iran, and Saddam had a number of reasons. And to be honest, Saddam, a lot of these reasons were actually justifiable, right? But his main reason, he wants to get that Iranian oil, right? But there are certain things like this. There's border dispute along the Shah Tel Arab waterway. I'll show you a map of that. Okay, so here, here's the Tigris, here's Euphrates. They come together and they form a common waterway. It's called the Shah Tel Arab waterway down here, and that is the border between Iran over here and Iraq over here. It's also the main transportation route for oil out of Basra. Right, that's Iraq's main oil facility to load onto tankers. Tankers go down the big river there into the Persian Gulf. And there was another one similar for Iran at Abadan, right? That's an oil export facility. But Iran was kind of smart. Iran also built pipelines to Bushehr and Karg Island. All right, they weren't they weren't trusting Iraq, right? Because you cut this off, right? So now, yeah. Let me get back here. So what the dispute was, Iraq said that the border is on the eastern shore of the river, which would deny Iran access to the river unless they pay tolls or whatever, right? And Iran said, no, 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 it's right down the middle. We have just as much right to use that river also, right? Well, that river is huge. That's a big transportation route. More important to Iraq, obviously, right? Because you have goods and services traveling through this transportation route up here, right? But it's important to Iran also with the oil facilities at Abadan, right? All right, so that's one thing, border dispute there, and then another one was Saddam's claims, which were probably right because I know that Iran was, historically supporting Shia and Kurdish rebellion within Iraq, right? So there's Shia groups and there's Kurdish groups who are rebelling against Iraq, and Iran is supporting that. Well, that's supporting sedition in your country. That's a big deal. I mean, what if I don't know, what if Canada was or whoever in some other nation was supporting, you know, some rebel or independence group here in America trying to break free? Well, Americans would be pissed off, right? So, and then Ayatollah Khomeini called for Islamic revolution. They exported in Iraq, so Islamic revolution in Iraq and overthrow the Ba'ath Party, right? So that's a threat. And then there was a historic dispute over who owned the Kurdistan province, right? The Kurdistan province is this is Iran's oil reserves here. This is oil wells, right? And the Kurdistan province is right around here, right? That's the lion's share of the oil. 90% of the oil is within that province, right? So Saddam's saying, well, ownership of that's disputed. You know Saddam wants that, right? Whether it's disputed or not. Maybe it is disputed, maybe not. But, if he gets that, he essentially doubles his oil reserves. And I say this about it, right? I guess I'll bring this in. Now, Iraq and Iran are enemies, right? If Saddam can capture that, right, he's taking out a big chunk of wealth. He's taking out a big chunk of the Iranian economy, right? He's killing the Iranian economy, weakening them, right? At the same time, he doubles his oil reserves, right? And he's going to double his production capacity, roughly double, right? Now, that's going to greatly increase Iraq's revenues. He's got a lot more money. And with that, he can build up his military forces so that he can dominate the Middle East. Now, that's not going to be a good thing. That's going to destabilize the balance of power in the Middle East. That's going to be a security threat, not just to Middle East nations, but to anyone who consumes oil from the Middle East, right? You can't allow that. Creating a world security threat in a vital oil region, right? So you can't allow them to take that, right? As far as I'm concerned. Then you give also Iraq plenty of spare production capacity. So he's got way more oil than he needs to support his economy, right? What that means is, of that extra oil capacity, he can cut production, right? This was production that was going to the world market. If he cuts that production to some extent, whatever, fractional extent, right, he's going to raise oil prices. So you're giving, by gaining this, he's not only going to get more resources to build his military power, to become a regional power, but he's also going to have the power to control price. And in both cases, you can't allow that, right? So I'm thinking that's the real security threat here for the United States and for other countries in the world, industrial countries in the world. Both can't be allowed. All right. All right. And then, the next thing comes from a guy who wrote the best book I read on the Iran-Iraq War, most detailed, was a guy named Hero. I forget his first name, right? But anyways, he said in his book that the U.S. had given Saddam one of the reasons why they attacked. I mean, he's going through a lot of these reasons too. One of the reasons why they attacked was the U.S. had given Saddam intelligence indicating that the disputed territory, could be taken by Iraq in a short offensive lasting only a few weeks. Well, it ended up lasting an 8-year war with over 500,000 deaths, but that was given to Saddam. You can take it with a grain of salt because I haven't seen original source documents to confirm that. And I also, for me, I need to find the original documents in order to make a secure statement here. And then also, Saddam wanted to opportunistically take advantage of Iran's weakened condition. He believed that after the Islamic Revolution, there was chaos within the country, right? They were going to be militarily weak. A lot of the officers of the corps is being eliminated, right, in the military, and also there's sanctions by foreign countries on Iran, and there's international isolation diplomatically. So he could take the opportunity to dominate Iran and then dominate the Middle East. Saddam also, and when Saddam attacked, he targeted Iran's oil industry. So that kind of confirms up here. He wants to get the Kurdistan oil province oil. All right. Now, so this war raged 8 years with about a half million deaths. And in this war, we support both sides, right? Our ally is Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and we supply them with satellite intelligence on the location and movement of Iranian army forces. Right, there's a satellite. Also, we supply them airborne early warning intelligence. These are AWACS aircraft. They're early warning, and basically what they do is they electronically scan the skies. A big radar dome, right, high up in the air, can see long distance. Curvature of the Earth is less limited, and it has look down capability, and then it has a lot of electronic surveillance stuff where you can, for example, identify planes coming in as who they are. Um, so we're giving that support too, and we're also selling them non-U.S. made weapons, right? And we also sold them dual use items. Dual use means used for civilian or military, right? It can be used for both. Uh, some examples are the equipment and materials to make chemical weapons, including the precursors, including some pretty serious pesticides, and a lot of biological weapons, right? And my evidence for this is the Regal report, which documents. I mean, uh, the Regal report was a investigation into the U.S. sale of dual-use items, right? And it has page after page after page of lists of all sorts of biological toxins. I mean, you name it, we sold it to them, right? To Iraq. We also sold them ballistic missile technology to sell them. High flying ballistic missiles are the ones that are flying, high altitude arc, right? Usually at least medium to intermediate range and longer, right? Uh, okay. And then we also sold them helicopters like these MD Defender helicopters made by McDonnell Douglas, Bell helicopters also, which can be used for civilian or they can be used for warfare. Now, so we're helping our ally uh, Iraq, but we're also helping our enemy Iran, who's fighting Iraq. So we're supporting both sides of this war. We're feeding weapons to both sides of this war. So we supply Iran with intel, just like we supplied intel to Iraq, right? We supply them military intelligence on Iraqi forces, and we sell U.S. weapons, munitions, and weapons repair parts for key things. You know, here's F-14 fighter plane, right? These were top of the line U.S. planes when Iran got them, right? Our Navy was getting them at about the same time, for the first time when Iran was getting them. Here's M60 battle tank, all U.S. made. These were sold to Iran when the Shah was in power. He bought a lot of U.S. weapons, and in fact, it was one of the ways in which the balance of trade was facilitated, maintained. It helped the balance of trade, recycling currency back to the U.S. Right? We're buying a lot of their oil. Well, we get it back by selling them weapons, right? Solves a big currency problem, and you know, we sold them all sorts of stuff: F-14s, F-4s, F-5s, M60s, M113. Armored personnel carrier, right? And they break down, so they need parts, right? So we're selling them from the start of the war. We're selling them. Um, I'll go more into detail of this in a separate lecture. And then Iran-Contra comes along, and these sales of things to Iran were through third-party deals where we actually sell them to Israel and they sell them to Iran. Now with Iran-Contra, we're taking direct control. We're selling them directly to Iran. The Reagan administration is going into business on its own as an arms dealer, selling weapons directly to our enemy, Iran. Right? And two key weapon systems that were sold were TOW anti-tank missiles and Hawk anti-aircraft missiles. Oh, by the way, they were sold from early on too. Right? But here's a TOW anti-tank missile. TOW stands for Tank Optically Guided Wire, no, Optically Tracked Wire Guided. Right? That's TOW. Right? Same as this Maluka Soviet weapon. All right? And then these are Hawks, which are mobile surface-to-air missiles, just like the SA-6s and SA-3s here, Soviet, right? Roughly comparable, both all these, right? And these prove very effective. These are some of the weapons that almost took Israel down, right? Israel almost went out largely due to these weapons. All right, let's see here. Okay, what am I doing here? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Now, so both of these weapons were highly instrumental in uh, the Iran's fall offensive, right? And they're proven effective. I mean, to me, it's no accident that we sold them this stuff here, right? Because they're identical to what the weapons that really helped the Arabs almost defeat Israel, right, in the Yom Kippur War. The Malyuka, that's that missile there, SA-3 and SA-6, right? So we're supplying both sides of the war. Are we fueling the war? Are we extending the war? Are we milking the war? Right? I mean, that's what it looks like to me, right? Do I have any documents where anyone's caught on record saying this? No, right? So, I mean, there's no 30-day plan, right? Um, so, I mean, I mean, you just use your intelligence. You just use common sense, right? It looks that way, right? And according to CIA analysis, 384, the war will pose. Oh, okay. So what's important here is the fact that you think that this may obstruct oil coming out of the Middle East. No, the CIA said no. There's going to be no limited threat to oil price, right? So long as Saudi Arabia can use its spare production capacity to support current prices, right? And remember, Saudi Arabia had massive amounts of spare production capacity. If they're producing 3.5 or 4 million barrels per day, based on OPEC quota, right? Well, they have 10 million barrels of production capacity. So they got whopping amounts of extra spare production capacity. Now, so that's 1980, that war starts. And by 1982, it's readily apparent. Let me show you what happened to the oil price. So we said this is the oil embargo here. Here is the Iranian Revolution, 79, and here's the Iranian embargo. Oil prices jacked up, right? Iraq war begins, and it starts falling off, right? This is kind of deceiving because there are additional factors here. One is, with the high oil prices here, the world economies were slowing down. They were in a recession, right? That helped decrease demand. That helped lower price, right? Also, with the high oil prices, there were increased conservation methods, all right? However, by about this time here, by 81 or so, the economies had recovered, right? So that's no longer a factor, right? And oil prices falling with lower oil prices, new conservation methods. There's less incentive to develop that as oil prices fell. So really, the key effect on oil price here was was overproduction by Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, especially Saudi Arabia and Kuwait in '85 here. That really brought down price here. plunge here. Um, okay, let's see here. Okay, so OPEC backfire. Yeah. All right. So idea is, in the 1970s, OPEC decreased production, no oil for you, all right, and that jacked the price. And then with jacked the price, OPEC had big revenues, all right, big marginal profits, all right. I mean, you got to balance that with volume, of course, but then they're making a lot of money, right? And result of the big cash inflows, they had big spending, and they spent also big on credit, and they got big debt because of that, and they spent up in debt because they assumed oil price is going to remain high and there's going to be always a good market, right? But what happened is this high oil price came back to bite them, right? And so this knowledge of this is now embedded in Saudi strategy. Don't raise price so high that it hurts the economy, because otherwise it's going to, if the economies retract, slow down, it's going to decrease demand for oil, and that's going to come back and bite you. It's going to be lower volume of sales. It's going to be lower price, right? So they didn't know it back then. They raised the oil price too high, right? Caused recession, right? Also also the high oil price caused conservation methods, uh, right? So with recession, you have decreased consumption. Businesses are shutting down. There's less business, so there's less transportation. People don't have jobs. They're consuming less gas, whatever, on and on, right? Less oil consumption, and oil price is too high. It motivates development of conservation methods, maybe increased fuel mileage, maybe increased insulation to reduce heating oil costs, right? Whatever. So that both of these decrease demand, and at the same time, with high oil price, that encourages development of non-oil OPEC oil production, right? These wells, which may have been marginally unprofitable at the higher price, are now feasible. They're doable. So you develop them, right? That increases the supply. That's going to bring down price. And there's a mini glut, because all these factors that causes a mini glut, and that brings down price. And now with price falling, you also have falling demand. In fact, I'll show you here. Okay. Here is this is oil production, but production is going to match demand, right? Supply is going to match demand unless there's storage, right? I mean, it's going to vary. Demand's going to vary a little bit from supply, to the extent there's fluctuation in storage volume, right? But that's not going to be that significant. It may go up and down a little bit. Demand. So even though this is supply, right, it's roughly demand, right? And you can see the overall world, right? Here you got, demand's still going up, but Iran Revolution. Let's see. Iran Revolution. With the Iran Revolution, it starts going down, right? And you got this dip here until it gets back about late 80s, right? But for a period there, it dropped. Okay, that's due to conservation. You can't say that's due to conservation. That's not due to bad economies, because economies were, by about 81, 82, the economies throughout the world had recovered, right? And of course, a big part of that is lowering oil price. Um, all right. Okay. Now let's see here. So OPEC is stuck with big debt, and they have no means to pay, right? So now they're kind of screwed. They're in a bind. Debt is realized as a weapon. Now, in the 70s, oil was realized as a weapon, and OPEC used that against Western industrial countries. Now, debt can be used against them. And this is going to be significant in the Iran-Iraq War, but it is very obvious in the first Gulf War. Less so obvious in the Iran-Iraq War, so that's why I say I'm invulnerable, until we get to the first Gulf War, where it is blatantly obvious. That debt destroyed OPEC. That's easy to explain. Less factors involved, right? The key factor was the war, the debt created from the war, and how that affected the behavior of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and dividing them out from OPEC. It was divide and conquer. Um, Increased OPEC quota. Oh, okay, yeah. What am I saying here? So a key outcome of the war was, this debt, right, and falling oil prices too, and you had increased OPEC quota cheating, right, including bartering for weapons, fueled by the Iran-Iraq War. For example, Iran was doing that. Okay, Iran needed weapons, and they bartered oil for weapons. This is all off quota, right? You don't tally that up in the quota, so they're not counting that against themselves, right? Uh, um, but they're selling oil nonetheless, and there's overproduction. Now it's going to be debatable. I can say I can't prove it. Uh, Logically, it is obvious that you know that a war is going to cause uh, a lot of bills, right, for these oil producing nations, and how do they pay for it? Whether they initially purchase it with loans, with debt, right? Well, you pay for all of it, whether you pay for it directly, right, or you pay off your debt. You got to pay it with oil, right? They're oil producing nations. Um, and it's not just Iran and Iraq, it's all the countries that supported Iraq, all the Sunni nations, right? Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, whatever, right? They supported Iraq to the tune of $60 billion. That's the same price for the entire price for the U.S. first Gulf War, right? That's a lot of money. That's a lot of debt, right? Puts them in the bind, right? How do they get out of that? Well, you got to produce oil. You got to sell oil eventually, right? Uh, Maybe not right away. Maybe you're going to hold on to that debt. Maybe you're going to keep servicing that debt, right? But eventually, you got to start, producing oil. That's what these oil producing nations do. Um, so they're off. I mean, you get overproduction, you got price falling, and then with falling price, typically what happens is there's a lot of OPEC nations which are barely staying afloat, right? They're poor oil producing nations, right, with economies that are heavily dependent upon oil, especially in like North Africa, right? All the African nations part of OPEC, whether it's Algeria, I know is part of OPEC, Morocco, maybe, some oil production there, Libya, Nigeria. But like another one is Venezuela. They're always on the edge of, they're a very impoverished nation, right? uh, and you get low oil prices, you know, it creates a lot of poverty, a lot of suffering, and that causes political instability, right? So countries respond by increasing production. Well, that just drives down prices further. That's a typical thing that happens. They cheat on their quotas, they overproduce, they go off quota with net back deals, right? Bargaining. So stuff like this happens. Factors that weaken OPEC control on price. Well, conservation weaken, that decrease demand. Non-OPEC producers coming in that decrease demand. OPEC quota cheating, that's huge, right? Net back deals, barter deals, these are all off quota. And then you have alternative energies instead of oil. Here in the United States, very little oil is used to generate electricity. I think like Hawaii is the only place where they use oil to generate electricity, right? Because you don't have gas pipelines going out that far. Uh, okay, but you know, you're not going to waste oil to generate electricity when there's other possible sources. Um, LP analysis. LP analysis. What? Okay. Well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to do an economic analysis using my general chart here for the oil at that time. All right. Just go quick through. I'm not going to give it right now. It shows how all these things are real things that play out, right? And all right. Okay, so 1985. We'll jump ahead. Something uh, key happened here. That's when um, uh, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait start really overproducing. All right, and that caused this big this big dip in oil price here coming down hard. All right. Okay. All right. Now, since the 1979 revolution, Iranian leaders, including the Ayatollah Khomeini and the president of Iran, Bani Sadr, they declared that the Arab monarchies are illegitimate and un-Islamic, and they pushed for export of the Islamic Revolution um, to overthrow these monarchies, and that posed an existential threat to these monarchies. All right, so I'll show you the map again. Right. Okay, let's see here. All right. Right, so here's Iran. They had a revolution. They're now an Islamic State, right? Islamic Republic, and they threatened to export the revolution to Iraq. So Iraq is threatened. In fact, Khomeini said, "We're going to overthrow you guys," right? That's one of the reasons why Saddam Hussein invaded, right? Syria is not much. I don't know if there's much. They're allied with Iran because Syria is Alawite, which is a sect of Shia, right? There's Jordan, that's a monarchy, Saudi monarchy, Kuwait monarchy, Qatar monarchy, UAE monarchy, Oman monarchy. They're all monarchies, right? So these are monarchies. They're not democracies. They're not a religious state. Iran wants it to overthrow these guys, spread their Islamic revolution. All right. All right. So countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, they're threatened, right? They fear that if Iran wins, if Iran beats, if Iran beats Iraq, well, they're next in the chopping block, right? Especially Kuwait, right on the border there. Kuwait's like, oh man, they're almost right next door. You got only the Fa Peninsula right there separating us, right? Uh, so they support Iraq with $60 billion. Right? Well, how do you pay for that? Right? You got to pay for that sometime, right? You're gonna give them 60. Whether it's a loan or whether it's just a payment, right? You know, you got to pay for that sometime, right? You pay for that with oil. Um, so I say the situation with uh, Iran's revolution was very similar to the French Revolution. All right, and we'll take a look at that. Put this in context here. All right, so here's France. In 1789, France had a revolution, and they instituted a democracy, a republic. All the rest of the European nations, all around, right? They're all monarchies. Okay, kings, whatever, controlling it, right? So the democracy was a threat, the spread of democracy. So all the monarchies were threatened by the new republic, France, because that could spread to their countries, get them overthrown, and institute democracy, and which has pretty much occurred today, right? I mean, monarchies still exist, but they're democratic monarchies, right? And the monarchs themselves have very little, power at all, right? It's the democracy that holds the power. Um, so that revolution did occur. But anyways, back in the French Revolution time, they fought against France to prevent the spread, and then France fought against them. They said the only way we're going to survive as a republic is if we expand and spread. That's the exact same thing Benny Sadar said. In order for our revolution to survive, it's got to spread because these guys pose reactionist, reversion, overthrow of our revolution here. That's what he's saying. Um, all right. So now, in late 1985, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait were the key guys. They started overproducing oil a lot, right? And one of the ways they're doing it was through these netback deals, right, which are off quota, right? So they don't count against your quota, but they're pumping out oil, right? They're selling more and more oil, all right, and with a certain type of deal, netback. I'm not going to explain that. It's not important that you know it. Um, And the stated reason for this was to recapture lost market share. Okay, fine, right? I can buy that, right? They probably lost some market share um, with a drop in demand, all right, and with increased non-OPEC nations coming in or OPEC suppliers coming in. And no doubt they lost market share, all right. So that's I'm sure that's valid, right? But I'm also saying this. I believe, and also Hero stated it, right, that an unstated reason for this overproduction was to wage economic warfare on Iran, right? I mean, you know, it's not Saudi Arabia and Kuwait never stated it anywhere. Am I likely to find a document somewhere which they accidentally released some document that proved? No, I'm not going to find some damn document, right? Right. So can I prove it? No, right? But it's just common sense. It's just intelligent. So I say using overproduction to wage war, economic warfare against Iran is one. It's intelligent. It's duh, right? Two, it targets the main threat. They have an existential threat posed by Iran. It targets that threat, right? So they're giving money, tons of money to Iraq. Well, you also help the war by whacking Iran's economy, right? Right? It just makes sense. Plus, you kill two birds with one stone. You can try to get your market share back. You can also wage economic warfare against Iran, right? These two are not mutually exclusive. They're not immiscible liquids, right? They can go together, right? So, I know I'm going to be attacked here. This is one of the things I'm going to be attacked. It's hard to prove, right? I mean, it's just you just use your brains here. For uh, uh, it's supported by the revenue data, right? So Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, for example, were key overproducers with their overproduction that caused falling price. But with their overproduction, they have increased volume. So it kind of balances out. And overall, Kuwait only lost 4% revenue. Saudi Arabia lost a little more, 11%. But that's doable, right? But look at Iran. Iran got whacked to the degree of 42%, right? Now, I believe one of the factors in this was Saudi Arabia and Kuwait were the ones who really increased production, but they could increase production. Their tankers were not directly involved in the war. Their tankers were, in a sense, immune to the war. Not so with Iran. Iran and Iraq were involved by at least 84, right? It's 85 now. They're involved in a tanker war where they're whacking each other's tankers, usually with air power. Also, Iran used Chinese Silkworm missiles, which are anti-surface cruise missiles, right, to hit Iraqi tankers, right? But largely through air power, they're whacking each other's tankers, right? So their shipping capacity is somewhat limited, right? Right. So I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm guessing that's the reason why Iran was affected far more severely than Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, right? They're involved in this war. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are not directly involved in the war, although they're fully engaged in the war economically, financing it, right? Um, okay. Now, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait never stated this, so people can say, "Oh, it's never said anywhere, so that's not true." Well, come on. You think they're that stupid? You think they're going to say blah blah blah? Hey, we're doing this to wage war against Iran, economic warfare against Iran. Well, if they do that, what's Iran going to do? Turn around and retaliate? Start whacking their tankers, right? I mean, no one's that stupid to do that, right? So I mean, it's never going to be stated by them openly, but I'm telling you what, it just makes sense. And it, you know, uh, overproducing is going to have both effects, right? In fact, you could say this: the real thing they got out of this was effective economic warfare against Iran. Did it help them recapture market share? No, not really, right? I mean, some of the marginal producers, I'm sure, went out of business, right? But but just like Saudi Arabia and OPEC tried to kill fracking, right? They hung on, right? And the idea was, well, who can hold the breath the longest, right? Because both Saudi Arabia's getting wet. It's like a strike, right? They go on, people go on strike to demand, right? Both are hurt. The workers are hurt. The company's hurt. right? Who can hold their breath the longest? Who's going to give in first, right? Well, the same thing with this overproduction, right? And with the frackers held out, and it was OPEC and Saudi Arabia who gave in, right, first. Uh, so what really the actual benefit was to economic warfare against Iran, and it paid off. I'll show you down here. Um, okay. Uh, they thought through all. Oh, I said this. I mean, you make a major policy move like this to break OPEC quotas and have major overproduction. I mean, you think this through. You think through all the angles, and this angle is glaringly obvious that it's going to also wage war, economic warfare against Iran, right? So I'm saying, they're thinking through all the angles. There's no way they missed this, right? They may not have stated it, but I'm saying, it's like almost impossible that they missed this. But still, I'll state this as my hypothesis because I don't have documents to prove it, right? So I know people want to attack. I'll say, what can you attack? I'm saying it's a hypothesis, an educated guess, right? So I'll back off, right? Attack what, right? I know I know liars are desperate to find any little thing that they can dig their claws into and attack. Then they're going to shift all focus upon it, try to block out everything else, hoping that no one remembers anything else. Just focus all things on the one little thing they can attack, right? Repeat that, blah, blah, blah. Say, it's all bullshit, because of this one point, right? That's what liars do. Shift focus, right? Distort perception, isolate it onto one little thing that is vulnerable. Now, overproduction caused prices to plummet. I showed you the graph there. U.S. prices, oil was pricing at one point on March 31st of '86 at close to $10 a barrel, right? Now, Persian Gulf oil, according to Jurgen, right, it looks like it's a little bit separate market, largely probably due to the war and probably increased insurance and transportation costs due to the war, right? But it's pricing at $6 per barrel, right, in '85, and then $7. It's still less than $7 a barrel in the following year, right? So this is rock bottom, right? OPEC is busted, right? And I'm saying a big part of this was the war. I mean, it's not only the war, right? But the war played a part of this. I'm not saying it's the whole thing, right? But to deny that it didn't play a part is also, right? So OPEC was busted. Iran was cheating by bartering oil for weapons, right? Saudi Arabia was overproducing, and I'm saying the big reason why they produced was not just to get market share, but to wage economic warfare, right? So that's part of the war. Prices dropping. Now, with price dropping, there's desperation in these poor countries, like I told you about, right? And what do? They scramble to maximize production, you know, right? But that only drives down price further, right? It's like a vicious cycle. So they started cheating. So Saudi Arabia and Kuwait are doing these netback deals. Well, that's spread. Other OPEC countries start doing netback deals of their own, and they're doing barter deals. Bartering oil for weapons or wheat, potash, urea. All right, I saw deals oil for wheat. Potash is what's that? A source of phosphates? Yeah, it's for fertilizer. Urea is a source of nitrogen, right? So all these are all involved with food here. Um, Oil for food. Uh, Individual OPEC countries were battling with each other over customers. So that's Jurgen said that. Of this period, he said these OPEC countries were battling over each other for customers, right? Different netback deals. They're all offering netback deals. Now, the U.S. government, Wall Street banks, big banks, and economic forecasters were all in agreement that the economic gains from low oil prices outweighed the losses to the oil producing sector. It's a narrow sector in whatever California, Oklahoma, California back then, right? The bigger picture, the bigger gains were for the whole economy, right? From low oil prices. These guys lose out. Low oil prices, they're gonna be squeezed, right? Because they can't make a profit, right? But the greater benefit is going to go to the overall economy, right? That's what they're saying here. Uh, that's Daniel Yergin quote there. I paraphrase it to make it shorter. Low oil prices serve to stimulate and prolong economic growth in the industrial world that had begun 4 years earlier, while at the same time driving down inflation. That's a quote from Daniel Yergin. All right, so it's growing our economy and is holding inflation in check, right? So as the economy grows, right, usually that helps drive inflation because you have higher demand. As the economy's growing, that means you have higher production, higher consumption, right? Right, you have higher demand for resources and products, so forth. Yeah, that's going to cause scarcity. That's going to drive up a price, right? Well, a big factor to hedge at is low oil prices. Okay, there's other ways of keeping it down, trade deals, so forth, right? That can have a big impact on lowering inflation. Um, if OPEC should fall apart, oh, this is a quote from the Associated Press. If OPEC should fall apart, most analysts agree it would not be an unmixed blessing. It'd be a total blessing, you're saying, but it would stand to benefit overall economic growth in the U.S. economy and strike another blow against inflation. So they're saying the same thing Jurgen said. And I was a kid at the time, but I was smart enough to realize I was understand the correlation between inflation and the economy. That's all was talked about back then. I don't know if people remember, but I remember as a kid. You know, freaking 10-year-old, 12-year-old kid, and I remember this stuff, right? 11 years old when the first embargo hit, right? Now, here's the thing on economic warfare. Economic warfare worked. By the spring of '88, Iran's ability and will to carry on the war were fast, were fading fast. Its economy was in shambles. Big part of that was the economic warfare. Another part of that was tanker war, of course, right? But a big part of that was economic warfare with oil price, right? Now, um, it was the spring of '88 when you had the second Battle of Fall. This is when Iraq finally returned to the offensive. Remember, Iraq started this war in September of 1980. Within a short amount of time, they're losing. They lost. When they first attacked into Iran, they had the initiative. They made chunks of territorial gains into the Kurdistan province, right? But by June of '82, Iran had taken it all back, right? So they were on the offensive before them, taking it all back. It was all taken back, and from then on, Iran had the upper advantage until the spring of '88, right? And a lot of this was due to the Iranian economy being whacked. So economic warfare was huge, played a huge part in this. Um, you know, any person who understands military strategy knows that at the base, I mean, there's many elements that go into strategic power, military power, but a principal, pillar is your economy. The main foundation is your economy that goes into military power. I mean, there's a lot more that goes into how you use that, national wealth into right, but to develop military power, but that is the base that you have to have. Uh, so we screw in '85. We screw our ally Saddam Hussein. Um, One, we gave them false intelligence on the location of Iranian forces. Show you this real quick again. Where are we at here? Okay. So Iran is right on the border. They took back all this territory. They're right on the border of the Shah Al Arab waterway here, right? And we give Iraq false information on where the Iranian forces are. That gives them the advantage of invading without opposition or less opposition. right? And also we at the same time we gave Iran military intelligence about Iraq. So we screwed around with bad intelligence, and we gave Iran intelligence on Iraq. And then in August of '85, President Reagan authorized the sale of key weapon systems to Iran, our enemy. TOW, and this is direct sales. TOW anti-tank missiles, Hawk 1,504 by the time of this offensive here. All right, and 18 Hawk by the time of this offensive. Missiles to Iran. Uh, Now, these weapons were proven vital for a ground offensive. The 1973 Yom Kippur War proved that these were effective. The Maluka anti-tank rockets and the surface-to-air rockets, right? And now the Reagan administration posed four bullshit reasons why they did this. Poindexter, for example, in recommending to the president, this is a quote from the Senate Iran-Contra investigation report, in recommending to the president the sale of weapons to Iran, gave as one of his reasons that Iraq was winning the Gulf War. That assessment was contrary to the views of intelligence professionals at the State Department, the Department of Defense, and the CIA, who had concluded as early as '83 that Iran was winning the war. Right? I mean, Iran was on the offensive before June of '82, a year earlier. Right? Why? Because they were taking back territory. And they took it all back by June of '82. So that means they were on the offensive. They turned the tide. So you could say it's before '83. I can shorten this. All right. Okay. Iran regained all lost territory by June of '82, and it was on the offensive for the next 5 years. Well, really until the spring of '88. Uh, and, until oh, so assisting Iran was increasing the imbalance against our ally Iraq and in favor of our enemy Iran, who threatened spread of revolution throughout the Middle East. That's not good, right? That's not a good situation. All right, all right. So that's a bullshit argument. This was not true. What I find amazing is that Ronald Reagan bought it, right? That tells you how out of touch he was. I mean, if you're the president, you got a major war going on. You should have some idea what's going on in the damn war, right? I mean, you're the president of the United States, responsible for, you're the commander in chief, right? Uh, it kind of makes you wonder how senile he really was at that time. Um, I don't know. I'm just guessing here. Um, so, in other words, to free the hostages, and this is a quote from the Senate Iran-Contra intelligence report. No matter how many promises the Iranians failed to keep throughout this secret initiative, the arms sales continued to generate funds for the enterprise. All right. So the enterprise was the front company developed by the NSC, right, to funnel money for the arms sales, right. I'm not going to say it's the funding money for the Contras because very little money got to the Contras. All right, so let's take a look at what happened with hostages. There it is. Okay. So I say this is bullshit. In my opinion, the Reagan administration forced. Okay. So bargaining for hostages. One, you never bargain with terrorists for one thing, right? Right. That's only going to encourage more terrorism, right? You never bargain for hostages. Why? Because that rewards hostage taking. What does that do? Right. That increases the amount of that don't encourage them to take more hostages. They're like, well, it worked once. It'll work again. Let's take some more damn hostages, which is what they did, right? Now, here's the situation with hostages. I divided up these guys up into different time periods here. These four guys here were captured or released or killed or escaped prior to when we started trading weapons for hostages. So this period here is while we're trading weapons for hostages. So these guys were all held prior to when we started. So 6 guys were held. We wanted to get 6 of these guys out, right? Now, as we're trading for hostages, um, one of these guys was killed, right? Then they took 3 more hostages, and they killed another guy. So while we're dealing with these guys for hostages, they're killing hostages and taking more hostages, right? Hey, I mean, why do you keep making deals with these guys? First of all, we're making deals with Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad through Iran. That's where we're getting the hostages from. That's who took the hostages, right? So we're negotiating through Iran with terrorist groups, right? And what do these terrorist groups do? Hezbollah blew up the Marine barracks and the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon, right? The Marine barracks killed 307 some odd people, 241 Marines, right? And we're negotiating with these guys. Embassy killed, I don't know how many, 17 Americans, like 30. I got the numbers down here somewhere. All right. I'll get when I do the full Iran Contra thing. I'll get to all the detailed numbers. Uh, I think 17 Americans were killed when the embassy was blown up, but it was like 30 some odd total, right? Right. We're dealing with these guys. Now, here's even worse. We had 8 weapons transfers with Iran for these hostages, right? And I say 6 times we fulfilled the deal. All 6 times we got screwed. In red here, that means they're screwed. Now, I didn't count these 2 arms transfers because we didn't fulfill the deal. Right? For example, the first deal was for 500 tow. Well, we gave 96 in the first installment. They gave us no hostages. All right, we didn't give the full 500, so this is understandable. I'm not going to count that. But then we gave the rest of the 408 for a total of 504, more than what they wanted, right? And we're supposed to get 6 of these guys back, right? Well, they gave us only 1, so they screwed us, right? Now, right? They screwed us, right? We fulfilled our end. They screwed us. Why should we make another deal with them? Right? Not only do we make another, we make 5 more, 6 more transfers, 5 more deals, right? So the next deal wasn't fulfilled. We're supposed to sell them 120 Hawk, right? And instead we sold 18, so they didn't give us any. All right, okay, I understand that, right? But then next deal was for 500 tow, and they promised the remaining 5, right? They gave us 0. They screwed us, 0. Then we sold them another 500 tow. They screwed us again, right? And then let's see. In the meantime, this guy was killed. Peter Kilburn was killed. All right. We sell them Hawk missile parts. So there's only 4. There's not 5 left anymore. There's only 4 because Peter Kilburn's dead. So we're supposed to get the remaining. They only give us 1. They screw us. We sell them more Hawk parts. They screw us 0 out of 3. And then they took 3 more hostages in the interim here, right? They killed this guy, right? And we sell them 500 tow, and we only get 1 out of 5. Screwed us every time, right? So they released a total of 3, and while we're making these deals, they took 3 more. Why? Because we made hostage taking profitable, right? So do we get anything from this? No, the net gain was 0. All right. And we got screwed every time we killed. Right? Now I'm saying this. To say that we sold these weapons to get hostages is bullshit. You don't get screwed every time. You don't have them take more hostages, right? You don't have them kill hostages, right? How is that working, right? So I'm saying it was the purpose of this was not to get the hostages. It was to funnel them weapons. And I'll show you it's not to get money for the Contras next. All right. So after we quit making these deals, they kept taking them. They took 5 more, and they killed one guy here. He was a Marine Corps Colonel Higgins here. He was killed. All right. All right. Yeah. So that worked out pretty well. Bullshit. Arms for hostages. All right. So next one is, we wanted to get money for the Contras, right? Uh, right. Uh, okay. Okay. So the Senate Iran Contra investigation report says, quote, most of these arms sales profits from the weapon sales here would remain with the enterprise, the front company, and never reach the Contras, right? So what were the numbers? All right. So here now, first of all, the profits from the legal sales were funneled through a National Security Council front company called the Enterprise, run by 2 privateers, retired Major General Richard Secord and Albert Hakim. Right, these 2 guys, not government workers, not officials. Right, they're private profit makers. Right, and of all the weapon sales combined, there were $16.1 million of profit made, and only $3.8 million got to the Contras. Right? That adds up to 23.6%, less than 1/4. Don't tell me you're serious about getting money to the Contras when, out of all the money, only less than 1/4 gets to the Contras. Now, what makes it even worse is the lion's share of the profits stayed with the Enterprise, stayed in the possession of Secord and Hakim. $10.6 million. That's 66.3%. Right? Now, that's almost 3 times the amount that got to the Contras. Right? So don't tell me you're trying to get money to the Contras when 3 times more money is being kept by these private, privateers. Right? And then $1 million of it was spent by North for, I don't know, whatever, covert operations. I'm not sure what he's doing. It just said covert operations in the Senate investigation report. And then if I add up the numbers, I don't know what happened to the remaining 700,000. Just add up the numbers. It's like, what? There's $700,000 missing there. I don't know. So in the end, most of the money from arms sales profits would remain with the Enterprise and never reach the Contras. Right? So money for the Contras, bullshit. All right, now the next one is a little bit more complex to explain, but it really shouldn't be that hard to understand. I mean, you don't have to be a military genius to understand this. It's pretty easy. And there was a state that, the Soviets can get influence, right? We got to help Iran here, right? And so, there were 2 main views. One view was, it was argued that if Iran should be defeated, that would make them vulnerable to Soviet takeover. Why? Well, Iran is right on the border with the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union used to include all these Baltic states, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova here, right? Georgia. Let's see where we at. Georgia, right? Armenia, Azerbaijan, all this stuff, right? Azerbaijan, right on the border with Iran here. There's Georgia, there's Armenia, there's Azerbaijan, right? Right on the border with Iran and Turkmenistan, all this stuff here too. So it border, Soviet Union borders, and all right, right on the border. Iran's defeated, Iran's weak. Well, right? But that's bullshit because look at the situation at the time, right? Uh, First of all, Iran wasn't at threat of losing. Iran was winning the war since 1982. So this occurred in 1985, 86. Iran was clearly winning the war at that time, right? It was not threatened with defeat. And furthermore, the Soviet military capability is way overblown throughout the Cold War, right? I mean, even during the Cold War, they go into Afghanistan, and they got their butts handed to them by the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. The Soviets at that time, between 1979 to 89, they're caught in a quagmire, right? Trapped in Afghanistan, getting a beatdown from the Mujahideen, a ragtag guerrilla force, albeit these guys are good fighters and very motivated, right? Right? But but you know, Iran is very motivated too. They're nationalistic, right? They have top of the line weapons for that time. U.S. weapons: F-14s, F-4s, F-5s, M-60s, M113s, TOW missiles, tanks, Hawk. Also, they had Lance missiles, right? All the U.S. small arms, uh, right? Right? And Iran is a huge country. To take Iran is not going to be easy. It's got some mountainous areas, right? You're going to have a lot of guerrilla fighting in the mountains too, right? And it's a huge territory to dominate and occupy, right? And furthermore, right, why this is so impossible is if the Soviets really were to invade Iran, well, that would justify true, legitimate reason for the United States to feed weapons to Iran, to use them as a proxy, to bleed out Russia, and it'd be a relatively easy, proposition there to do. It would be a really easy, relatively easy operation to bleed out Russia, and cheap. All you got to do is feed key weapon systems, right? Same type of things. More Hawk, more TOW, maybe some Stingers again, right? Like, and you can, and then what would happen is the Soviets would find them trapped in a far worse situation than Afghanistan, right? Fighting another losing situation, many times worse than Afghanistan, being bled dry by a U.S. proxy support, right? In fact, the Soviet Union gave up on Afghanistan only a year later. That's when they began to pull out, right? So they're getting beat down. I mean, don't tell me they're going to go invade Iran, right? Right? They're not going to fight two wars at the same time when they're losing this war, all right? So this war's going. All right? I mean, does that add up? Does that make sense? I mean, I can't make it simpler. Um, then it was also argued. The Senate Intelligence Report said it was argued that you know uh, the Iranians may um, uh, go to the Soviet Union to purchase weapons and then become dependent upon it. Oh, bullshit, right? Uh, for a number of reasons, right? So I'll give a whole bunch of reasons here. I got 7 reasons. I mean, this is more bullshit than you can believe, right? Oh, okay. First of all, the Soviets were not going to help Iran. They were committed to fighting Iran and not supporting them. Why? I mean, they were committed to helping Iraq because Iran was promoting the export of their Islamic revolution. That's what they said they got to do. They got to export it to help it survive, right? And that threatened the security within the many Islamic regions within the Soviet Union. So Soviet Union is not a cohesive nation. It never was, right? It was a mismatch. I mean, in so many ways, there were so many centrifugal forces blowing it apart, right? One of them was religion. One of them is national aspirations. These guys wanted to go independent, right? And eventually they did, right? But all these had Islamic identity, the Islamic nation. Tajikistan here is Islamic, Turkmenistan Islamic, right? Critical was Azerbaijan was Islamic, all right. That's a key oil and gas region. Caucasus are strategic too, and you got Chechnya in there. This is all Islamic. This area here. Georgia is mostly Christian. Armenia is almost all Christian, I believe. Yeah, I guess that's why the Turks persecuted them. I was wondering because Turkey is Islam. Um, that was around World War One era. That was a big genocide there, um, and Chechnya is one of in the Caucasus, right about here. Chechnya tried to break away 3 times in the history. It's always been giving Russia or the Soviet Union problems, right? Trying to break away, right? Uh, right? And so these territories are threatened instability with spread of the Islamic revolution. So Soviet Union is not going to give Iran weapons. Are you kidding me? It supported Iraq. All right. Yeah, I say here, Chechen attempted to break away 3 times. Russo-Japanese War, right? Uh, Lost that war, did poorly. kicked off the revolution, 1905 revolution. Chechen takes the advantage, tries to break away. World War One, they get their butts handed to them in World War One. Causes a revolution. It allowed for a revolution. Um, Made the opportunity. That was a Bolshevik revolution, and Chechen used that opportunity to try to break away. World War Two, Hitler invades, right? Operation Barbarossa, right? Trying to go down into the Caucasus to get the oil here, right? So Chechen breaks away then. All right. Now, Iran, as a religious state, was diametrically opposed to the Soviet Union, which was anti-religious, right? So I'm saying that maybe Iran, if Soviet Union offered to help with weapons, which they wouldn't, but if they did, maybe they would have taken weapons, right? But they're not going to make themselves, beholden to the Soviet Union. They're not going to give the Soviet Union leverage over them, right? Why? Soviet Union was anti-religious and atheistic. They were diametrically opposed. They were antithetical, right? And in fact, that was one of the tactics the CIA used to get Mossadegh overthrown. Remember, they manufactured false documents, right? That connected Mossadegh to the communists, and then they passed these documents, right? That proved the connection. Why? Because that pissed off the religious leaders, right? They hated the communists, right? Now Iran is an Islamic republic ruled by the religious leaders. You think they're going to have any love for the communists? Um, all of Iran's major weapon systems were U.S. made. Why would Soviets can't help there, right? You need repair parts for these, right? You're not going to go to the Soviet Union for this, right? You go to the U.S. or you actually are going to Israel, who's being the third party through which the U.S. Stuff is being funneled through, right? After the breakup of the Soviet Union, Iran acquired some Russian tanks built under license, but that's way after this. That's in the 1990s, right? They got some Russian tanks, but that was actually licensed, mostly built under license from Poland. Poland had a license to build some Soviet tanks, T-72s, I believe, and then uh, that's a minor, that's after this whole thing, anyways. That's in the 1990s. Iran didn't even need Soviet weapons with other sources available. For example, open market sale of U.S. weapons and parts, Chinese silkworm missiles, a lot of international arms merchants out there, right, selling U.S. weapons and parts. Um, yeah, small arms. You want to go to a non-Russian right thing, right? Right. If you're afraid of Russian, is going to right. If you go to China for like small arms, they can make tons of small arms. AK-47s out, loads of them. Um, Israel is a reliable source of weapons for Iran since the beginning of the war. Even if Iran purchased Soviet weapons, which is like zero probability, very, very, right, that would not necessarily give the Soviets leverage. Hell, I don't think it may give any leverage at all, right? You got alternative sources that cuts into that leverage. Also, we gave huge amounts of critical weapons to Iran, and they gave us no leverage, right? We got screwed in the hostages. How'd that work out? How'd that work out for us? Crap. How's it going to work out for the Soviet Union? You think they're going to get any more leverage over Iran? No. They're going to say thank you very much for the weapons, and I'll screw off. Um, it was Iraq who was dependent upon Soviet weapons. Yeah, right. The Soviets applied a lot of weapons to Iraq. Iraq got weapons from everyone. They got weapons from France, Britain, Germany. They got weapons from us, although non-U.S. weapons or dual-use weapons. They got chemicals, and biological stuff too, but um, we didn't sell them like fighter planes or tanks or whatever, right? Um, so we're allied with Iraq while the Soviets are supplying them weapons, right? Secretary of State Schultz dismissed the notion that Iran was in danger of falling into Soviet hands, right? And I'd agree, man. This is all bullshit. Soviet threat, bullshit. During the Cold War, Soviet military threat, bullshit, right? Fear mongering, scare tactics, more for defense appropriation bills, more for money making. Um, all All right. Um, yeah. So what I say is this, right? Now this is my hypothesis again, right? I contend this. I hold this. It's not like crystal clear here. It's like okay, it's common sense, but it's not. Once you get to other wars, the first Gulf War, it becomes crystal clear, right? So all four reasons here are bullshit cover stories. Now, if these are bullshit, there still has to be a reason why we funneled plenty of weapons to Iran. We supplied both sides, Iran and Iraq, with weapons, with munitions, with war materials, with repair parts, with intelligence, right? There had to have been a reason. If not these, there's still a reason out there, right? My contention is to increase Middle East oil production and so regain control of oil price. Why? Remember here, peak oil, right? 100% pro rationing. We lost control of oil price, right? Who's got control of oil price? And then what do they do with it? They screw our economy. OPEC, right? They embargo our economy, right? How do you get back control of? I mean, you think that's not critical? Getting your whole economy and the world economy screwed, right? By oil. So my contention is increase Middle East oil production, right? To regain control of oil price indirectly through conflict and war. U.S. fuels the war. Are we not fueling the war on both sides? I mean, you cannot deny that. Significant weapons on both sides. And that's going to increase war costs, right? As you intensify the war, you extend the war, you sell them weapons. They got to pay for it. So, how do Middle East oil producing countries pay for it? Well, they got to sell oil. If not now, they can take out loans, but they got to pay that back later sometime, right? So sometime down the line, they got to sell oil, right? And in addition to that, it's going to help fracture OPEC. Oil prices are going to fall. Plus, you're going to get quota cheating when oil prices fall, right? And then that's going to help bust OPEC, right? It's going to be in disarray. Oil prices are going to fall further. I mean, this was very evident after the first Gulf War. I mean, it's kind of evident here, but you can say that a confounding factor as well. They had the motive of wanting to regain market share. That's why they overproduced also. Okay, so that's what makes it. That's a confounding factor which you can't nail it down. All right, all right. I mean, but just common sense. Both factors are valid. All right. Plus, U.S. support for Iran. Right. Wait, what here? Oh, okay, yeah, right. So what happened with U.S. support for Iran? We support Iran, right, with key weapon systems that helps them with that Far Peninsula offensive. They capture the Far Peninsula. Now that imposes a direct threat to Kuwait. Why? Let's see here. Let me. Here's the Far Peninsula. Iran captures it, right? What does that do? That puts Iranian forces right on the doorstep with Kuwait. You think Kuwait was not, you know, scared out of its mind? I mean, Kuwait is nearly defenseless. Back then, Kuwait had very little military. It was after the first Gulf War, when Iraq invaded, that they made big purchases and tried to build up their military, right? To get it somewhat. They had barely nothing prior to that, though, right? So during the war, Kuwait's got nothing to defend itself. You got Iran right on its border. What are they doing? They're threatening to overthrow the monarchies. You think these guys weren't scared? You think they were not supporting Iraq? Trying to keep Iraq in the fight there? All right. So what happened was this was kind of critical because Kuwait is threatened. Kuwait's scared, witless. So it pushed Kuwait closer to the U.S. They sought U.S. protection. Back then, it was through U.S. escorted Kuwaiti tankers, and that started in July of '87. And then this led to, or let's see here. Right. So the outcome of this was U.S.-Iran conflict. I'll show you how that developed here. All right. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah. So that's going to come up. It'll be the next day. Yeah. It's going to come up down here. Um, all right. 1986. The weapons were important because they helped out in a key Iranian offensive, February to March 10th of 86. Iran launches a ground offensive that seized Iraq's Far Peninsula, their only access to the Persian Gulf. Remember, I showed you that right now. Here's the Far Peninsula. Here's how they get oil out from Basra through the Shatt al Arab. Right. Well, that's taken by Iran. Right. No oil out, no food or any other goods in, right? You got to find alternatives. So they would go through Kuwait, right? But for a time there, they're screwed, right? And then when they're going through Kuwait, well, that's not optimal. Shipping through water is a lot cheaper and so forth. They got to build new transportation routes, right? Probably had to rely upon trucks for uh, any goods. Oil they sent through pipes to the port facilities right around there is Iraq, Kuwaiti port facilities. Uh, all right. So now, no oil export or food import until more costly alternative transportation established. Iraq can't finance its war. Iraq is screwed bad, right? Did we play a role in that? Yeah, we played a part in it. Oil export was 60% of Iraq's economy. So if they lose that, do they have 40% remaining? No, you lose that 60%. That's going to take a big chunk out of that 40%. It's going to whack their economy, right? Then what happened was in November of '86, the Iran Contra conspiracy was made public. So now everyone knows that the Reagan administration illegally sold weapons to Iran. I put the Bolin Amendment here because that's one of the laws. There was a number of laws that were broken by this. Right, it was illegal in a number of ways. Right. So now, including Iraq, knows that we sold their enemy Iran key weapon systems. Right. So in January, Iraq blamed U.S. For the loss of the Fall Peninsula, right? And I remember reading this article clearly. Uh, it's funny how you remember certain things, right? I remember exactly where it was, what it was like. I remember I was in the lobby of a Holiday Inn in Philadelphia reading the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I remember there was like this whitish marble tile on the floor. Somehow that stuck in my mind. I was in the lobby sitting there in the morning, and I read an article here in which Iraq complained that, let's see here, blamed the U.S. false intelligence on Iranian troop movements for the loss of their strategic Fall Peninsula, right, which is their only access to the Persian Gulf. They also complained that the U.S. sold key weapons to Iran, stating that the revelation of U.S. weapon sales to Iran indicates, quote, a larger premeditated design, right? Some bigger scam going on, some dirty game, right? That's what they're thinking, right? U.S. is scamming something. They got some larger strategic thing going on. I'm saying it's to fuel the war, right? But anyways, whatever do you think they don't want payback? Right? They're pissed. We screwed them twice, right? Plus, they're going to want deterrence so that we don't screw them again, right? They want to take some action here, so they get us back, and then they create some leverage where we don't try to do it again, right? Then that opportunity comes on May 5th when the Senate hearings on Iran Contra begin. Everyone involved from Reagan, McFarland, Secord, Poindexter North, everyone else are dragged before the bar and required to testify, right? Although these guys lied their asses off, right? And they also, failed to remember. I don't recall. I don't recall. Right? Uh, anyway, there was enough to convict a whole bunch. A lot of the guys went to jail. Um, Reagan administration is in a highly vulnerable position. They're on the hot seat, right? So they're on trial, Right? A lot of them went to jail for this, right? Um, Reagan didn't go to jail, but a lot of these other guys did. Um, then what happened was, so they're vulnerable. They can't say anything against Iraq at this point. Iraq does something. Uh, all right, so May 13th through 17th, Iraq changes its attack profile. SAP, ship attack profile. They're attacking tankers, remember? And now, when I was in the Persian Gulf, we called the typical Iraq attack profile the Farsi hook. It typically consisted of a flight of three F-1 Mirages, the French-built plane here. They used to use Super Entendard, a different French plane, but then they bought a newer plane, the F-1 Mirage, kind of comparable to the F-16, maybe not quite as good as the F-16, but sort of comparable. Um, and they would fly southeast across the Persian Gulf to Farsi Island, then make a sharp turn to the northeast, and then launch their exocet missiles against Iranian oil tankers coming out of the main export ports at Karg Island and Bushehr. Now let me show you. Where do I have this here? Yeah, here you go. Okay, so this map shows a number of things. Karg is roughly right around there. Bushehr is roughly right around there, I guess. Maybe Bushehr is there, right? Anyways, that they export their oil out of here. Remember I said here's the main oil reserves. Well, they got pipelines coming down to here, right? They didn't trust access to the Abadan down there to the Shatt al-Arab waterway, right? So now the Iraq would attack their tankers coming out of here, right? Iranian tankers. They would fly their F-1 Mirages down to Farsi, roughly about here, and then hook up this way and fire their missiles. So here are the F-1 Mirages. These are the missiles. They're an anti-ship missile, somewhat similar to the U.S. Harpoon, although a little less capable, shorter range, smaller warhead, right? But roughly the same idea, meant to attack ships, right? And this map, which is published by the U.S. Naval Institute, um, shows that Iraq and Iran had established war exclusion zones. Um, so here is the Iraq. Okay, anything on to the east of this over here, that's a war zone. You're okay outside it, right? All right, but if you're here, you're fair game. Don't go inside here. Iran said, okay, we'll make a little bigger zone here. Don't go in this zone here, right? You go in here, you're fair game. So in both cases, the Stark, when it was attacked, was outside that, right? Way down here, way far away from the typical flight profile, right? So to go down here to get to Stark, you got to go way out of the normal route here. All right. What am I saying here? Okay, so let's see. Bushehr, 90% of our oil. Both Iran and Iraq had designated prohibited war zones. I told you about that. My sources for this are one, the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff's investigation report. Two, sent to the Secretary of Defense. Right, you can get that online. And also, uh, I was on the command ship for the Joint Task Force in the Persian Gulf at the time. Well, not at the time, just after this, and I was part of the ship staff. But the admiral who was commander of the entire Joint Task Force, right? Navy, Army, Air Force, Marines, right? Out there, the combined unit in the Persian Gulf. His staff would give us briefings, and one of the briefings they taught us about the Stark attack, and it is pretty much exactly what the report says here. All right, so on the 13th and 14th, Iraq changed its attack profile and flew two ship attack profiles, SAPs, close to the coastline, way to the south of the 2730 late detect line. Let me show you a picture of that. There's the 2730 late detect line. Farsi Island's up here. This is where the Stark was hit, right? Um, all right, and then on the 17th, they flew two more SAPs south of Farsi Island in the morning of the 17th. Then that evening, they flew a single Iraq F-1 Mirage, flying on the coast, and they fired two Exocet missiles, which came in from 270 degrees due west and hit the Stark at a position, that position there, killing 37 American boys and wounding 21 others. All right. So, okay. Let me show you again. Here is, so this is where they flew. All right. Closer to the shoreline here. I'm thinking to evade detection. Way to the south, right? Then they fired missiles from here, and missiles came in from due west, 270. You know, here's 000, here's 090, here's 180, here's 270 here, due west, right? And both missiles hit the Stark at the same point, right about there, largest radar reflection profile. That's probably why it hit there, right? The first missile didn't explode, and actually the first missile did more damage because it kept burning and the fuel spread fire. The second missile did explode, and it exploded just inside the bulkhead. Much of the energy from the explosion blew outwards. You see this is gaping hole. It blew outwards, and that dissipated the energy, right? So the report said most of the energy was done by the unexploded missile, right? Kind of interesting. But what's also interesting is how the U.S. ship could take pretty significant battle damage and survive, right? During the Falklands War, a British Sheffield, the Sheffield destroyer, or was it a destroyer? I think it was a destroyer, not a frigate. It was either a frigate or destroyer, somewhat similar to the Stark or larger. It took one Exocet and sunk, right? So this is kind of an aside, but it's a testament to the quality of U.S. warships here, sort of, I guess, right? All right. So now, according to the Joint Chiefs of Staff report, Stark was and had been in international waters well outside the Rocky and Iranian declared war zones. All right. So, do you think this was an accident or was it intentional? I mean, before, right? Was it payback? I mean, given all what you know now, was it payback? Was it a deterrence, or was it both? All right. But let's see what the Reagan administration said. So both the State Department and Pentagon immediately issued public statements that they believe it was an accident, right? And when I heard this, I was like, "What?" Right? Who are you crazy? You haven't even done investigation. There's no time to do investigation. How do you come out and say this, right? Right? And I'm thinking, I mean, I was shocked, and I'm willing to bet that most Americans aren't really paying attention. Maybe they overhear the news and they're, oh, okay, fine, all right, if you say so, right? But I was like, what bullshit, right? I call bullshit. And at first I figured, well, Reagan administration is probably just trying to cover for our ally Saddam. But then I was like, pretty soon I put two and two together, pretty right away. I said, wait a minute, right? They're not protecting Saddam. They're protecting themselves. I mean, just look at the situation, right? Right? We had just screwed our ally Iraq bad, giving them false intelligence on the position of Iranian armies, right? And we gave Iran key weapon systems for an effective ground offensive, TOW and Hawks, right? Iraq knows both of these, right? I don't think they knew that we gave intelligence to Iran, right? Well, they know we gave the weapons. By November of '86, that came out. Information comes out, we sold critical weapons for an armored ground offensive, TOW and Hawk. So Iraq knows we screwed them twice. I can shorten this. I'll shorten it later here. All right. These combined were key to a major Iranian victory in which Iran seized Iraq's Faw Peninsula, cutting Iraq's only access to the Persian Gulf, which is strategic. No oil out, no food in, no other materials for your economy. Can't sell oil, can't finance a war. We really screw Iraq bad, right? This is significant. This is strategic, right? Starting on May 5th, 87, the Reagan administration is on trial for the legal sale of weapons to Iran. The Reagan administration is on the hot seat and vulnerable to attack at this point. They can't say boo if Iraq attacks, right? This is opportunity for Iraq. Now, 8 days later, only a week later, Iraq changes its ship attack profile. 2 flights on the 14th, 2 more in the morning of the 17th. Then in the night of the 17th, they fly an F-1 Mirage and they hit a U.S. warship with 2 Exocet missiles, killing 37 boys, wounding 21 others. We immediately respond that the attack was an accident before any investigation, right? I was incredulous, which is euphemism for bullshit. There are 2 possibilities. One, it could have been an accident. But if it was an accident, then it had to have been intentional. And if it was intentional, there had to have been a motive. And that motive points directly back to Iran-Contra and the weapon sales to Iran, for which the Reagan administration is on trial right now, right? So if they pointed the finger at Iraq and said, "Hey, you did it on purpose. It's intentional," right? Well, really, they're pointing the finger at themselves for selling those weapons, right? And then the responsibility for the 37 dead boys, and 21 wounded would be dumped on their heads, all right? So now the Reagan administration wants no part in that, so they immediately jump and they say, "It was an accident. It was an accident. I swear it was an accident." Right? They don't want anyone to think it was intentional because that will point back at themselves. Okay? And that's the way it goes down in history. It was an accident. Right? My ass. All right. But I mean, I get. Can I prove this? Do I have Iraq on paper? Say, "Oh yeah, we did this." No, right? I can't. I don't have hard evidence to prove it. But they did this, right? I mean, all right. So let's examine this like a good cop. Iraq had clear motive. We just screwed them, out of the Faw Peninsula, right? Put them in a bad spot by screwing them with false intelligence and selling their enemy key weapons, right? You think they don't want payback? And they also want deterrence, right? Hey, don't try to do this again. Otherwise, we're gonna screw you again, right? You're not gonna get out of this one, right? Iraq had the perfect opportunity. The Reagan administration was on trial and was vulnerable. They couldn't say boo. They couldn't say squat. Otherwise, they would incriminate themselves, right? So they had perfect motive. They had full motive. They had perfect opportunity, and they took extraordinary measures. They changed their attack profile drastically, crossed well to the south, well outside of the war zones, right? They changed their typical attack profile, skirting the shoreline to evade detection, and then they fired two missiles into the U.S. warship, right? I'm thinking they did 4 scouting flights. These were scouting flights, right? The 5th flight was their attack flight at night. This one occurred at night. You think that's an accident? I mean, come on. That's all bullshit. That's an accident, right? They had motive. They had opportunity. They took extraordinary measures, right? Right? What were the 2 purposes? Payback and deterrence, right? Now, any money people are attacked. You can't prove that. That's conspiracy theory. That's crazy. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can get convictions on circumstantial evidence, right? It all adds up, right? But court trials, who knows how they go, depending upon the jury and so forth, right? So I don't know if you can prove this in court, right? But I mean, come on, you just know. So that's a lot of stuff that was done. We overthrown governments here in Middle East, and we're supporting both sides of war, right? Fueling the war. Okay. And comes back to bite us. But who gets bit? The Reagan administration? No, U.S. sailors, right? I mean, that's what pisses me off. U.S. boys got to pay the price for this stuff. All right, that's it.